Hey, this is Mario and Molly. This is our channel, Uranian Streams, and on this channel we do astrology mainly. We also do some human design, and then we relate it to other practices. We relate it to literature and mythology and holistic healing and whatever we fancy, astronomy and other even like alchemy and other topics and magic and such systems and we're going to continue our series of doing the moon in particular signs, and this time we're doing moon in Libra, and me and Molly kind of each share our own perspective, and she's going to start us off.
Okay.
And so, go ahead.
So Libra's an interesting sign. It's to me, what's the terms you hear a lot attributed to Libra is, oh, people who are very oriented around the other or keeping the peace, quote unquote, balance, equilibrium. These are kind of like terms that get thrown out with this energetic. And when I really think about where it falls in the wheel after Virgo, Virgo's in pursuit of this kind of perfection, and I feel like Libra follows that. But it is the first sign to be externally positioned, meaning it falls in the first to kind of be above the hemisphere of the chart, where
Mm-hmm.
it's interactive with the other, the world, the relating. And so, in my opinion, that drive for balance or fairness, or we could even say justice, because it does rule the justice card in the tarot, is very much like a pursuit of perfection, but as it relates to the external. And so that's why I believe it can actually be quite an extreme energy, Libra, which people, think of it as very balanced. But I feel like when I think on this sign, it's like, can we really ever have balance? Is that even possible? It might fall seasonally, at that equilibrium, that sol or that fall equinox point, but the sign itself, like striving for that perfect fairness or justice, like I think it can be so extreme because it's like almost this like impossibility in a way. And a few of the examples who embody this or exemplify a Libra moon in one way or another, that come to mind. One is Fidel Castro had this moon, and same with Stalin. And I find it really fascinating because they were very involved with Leninism, Marxism, and this idea that there should be no class, everyone's equal, and how idealistically that might sound really great, or, oh, that sounds so balanced. But in practice, does that work? And is that even the reality? Is that really how, like, is that really balanced? And we see how it can take that extreme form, right? In the pursuit of what they feel is fair or just. So those were two examples when I was doing the research on this moon that I thought about. And I think the balance piece also comes in with the fact that it's, especially in the moon placement, it's an air sign in the moon, which is like the water elements. But it's a cardinal air, which is like the fire element. And to me, Venus, the ruler of Libra, is very much kind of an earthy, also watery planetary energy. So really, it's like a sign that like actually fully embodies almost all the elements, if not all of them.
Interesting.
And so I feel like that's kind of where it gets this kind of reputation for like this equilibrium or balance, or doing what is, you know, the most, I guess, fair, quote unquote. So yeah, those are just some kind of like opening thoughts on, maybe like a less popular opinion of what Libra represents, but I definitely see the Venusian thing come out a lot, maybe in the appearance of the individuals who have strong Libra, either a descendant or the moon or the sun. They tend to be very kind of like symmetrically, aesthetically beautiful people. Um, but in terms of it being a moon ruling the moon, we have to remember it's still air ruling the moon. So there's this
Let
like,
me,
go ahead.
let me nuance that and come back to you if that's cool, because
Totally.
you're covering that aspect of of what usually is the prejudice or is the perspective of what Libra is. And we all know, I think, anyone who's penetrated the facade of this Libran kind of um, uh, reputation of harmony, of supposed harmony, we all know it's bullshit. We all know when you penetrate to the core of a Libra, whether it's a Libra sun or a Libra moon, they persist in conflict. There's constant extremes and tension between
Extremes,
those
yeah.
extremes because they're attempting to find harmonization.
Of all these different elements.
And it's constant tension until they find it in those, in those rare peaks, right, on their
Hmm.
journey. But you're dealing with a lot of conflict with a lot of Libra energy at times, and so it's great you pointed that out. I mean, and as you said too, and I want to extend is, the common the I think this is kind of the Linda Goodman perception, but it's the idea that, of course, the journey through the cycle of the zodiac, right, begins with the baby Aries, and then it begins its transition with Virgo, which is the holy sign, the one right in the middle, before the transition to the other. So Libra is the sign that begins the transition, as you were suggesting, as you were saying, to the focus on the other. So it's the soul being born in a sense. It's now the self has to deal with another. And how
Hmm.
does that how can we get to that harmonization? And so Libra is the attempt and the struggle to achieve that. And
Yeah.
so, as you noted, like, it tends to be a sign that is really a lot more chaotic than we admit in astrology.
I think particularly maybe with the moon here, because the moon being such an intimate part of who we are, if that's concerned with the other, then well, how do you feel as the individual? You know what I mean? If that moon is so like wanting to be in relation, it's almost like maybe lacking that like introspective knowing of oneself or how to care for oneself. If it's like, well, what's gonna make the other pleased or happy, or
You mean
you
if it's
know,
more codependent, more focused on the other?
potentially that could be like a shadow of this moon. When I think of Libra, I think of like that expression, everything in moderation, including moderation, because it's like, I mean, like yeah, that pursuit of just trying to have everything be so balanced, that can be kind of like a fool's errand, you know what I mean? Like in my opinion, just because life is just like ebbs and flows.
And consider the countering tensions of if someone's a Libra sun, and I know we're getting kind of into that, but I'll bring this back to the moon. Consider the development. A Libra sun is one who is slowly, gradually coming to terms with what it means to be a Libra. This is a life exercise. This takes a while for a Libra sun to become fully itself. So there'll be a lot of tension and conflict before some level of harmonization with the self is achieved. So it doesn't always have to be projected onto the other, which is its
Mm.
dominant theme, is to have that ongoing circular conflict. Whereas a Libra moon is coming from there. So a Libra moon is coming from the space that I want partnership. I feel complete by the other, but I
Mm.
also have myself. So there's something with Libra moons where, and we can kind of maybe segue into this other facet of the Libra moon, which is the aesthetic sensibility and the sense of judgment. The ability to take sensory perception and to have very pristine judgment on it.
Right. I
This is
agree.
very powerful in the Libra moon.
Yeah, I agree. I think a misconception is, oh, they can be indecisive. And I actually would disagree with that because it's cardinal air. You know what I mean? It's air that wants to formulate an ideal. It wants to formulate something that it can really like get behind, like a concept it can really be like, this is what I stand for. And I think this is exemplified in some other examples of this moon that I can think of, like pretty high profile people in Hollywood who have this moon. For instance, one first one I'll talk about, Leonardo DiCaprio. He's the person who's always kind of trying to have the cause of raising awareness about climate, change and the earth, the crisis of the environment. And then we have the Libra moon, Mel Gibson's a Libra moon, and he's one of the Hollywood, well high up in Hollywood who speaks out a lot on like the Hollywood elite and has his own, like, he's decided to start directing his own movies, I learned, because he doesn't really want to be associated with a lot of the high end directors because he doesn't like believe in some of the like corruption and scandal that goes on in the like high level Hollywood. And he's kind of like a, if you want to use the term, whistleblower of sorts, considering, how high profile is, he will speak out on like certain issues. And then another example I thought of was Sylvester Stallone. He, especially during COVID, interestingly, would like speak out about wearing masks and how he doesn't think that he said his character Rambo like wouldn't wear a mask. So I don't, he doesn't believe that's for the greater good. So it's interesting because it's not necessarily the common thought, but there is this like wanting to have like a stance. And when I did that episode on whistleblowers, where I was like looking at the astrology of whistleblowers, many of them have Libra moons or like a lot of cardinal energy. But it is interesting because it's like that search for like, well, what is justice? What is fair? What is, that judgment element? Because it's that like piercing thought of cardinal air wanting to like, yeah.
And it's also, I mean, we need to consider Libra's ruled by both Venus and Saturn.
I didn't know that. I had no idea.
It'll bring its focus on the Saturnian aspect, especially if there's aspects, to Saturn. Then there's a cold kind of sense of judgment, and then very little aesthetic sensibility. The Venus influences the aesthetic sensibility, and then the Saturnian influences that kind of.
When does it have rulership by Saturn though? I've just never heard that.
Well, we should bring it up. It's pretty sure it's what's the terms again? Those are the planet. That's where Saturn and Venus are most comfortable. Venus.
Oh, okay. So it's not so much a co-ruler, but it's part of the it's one of its like natural dispositors.
Well, its rulership is Venus, and then with Saturn, it's going to be.
It's exalted in Libra.
Yeah, it's exalted in Libra, and then the other term in Saturn.
That's interesting. Yeah, that makes sense though, right? Because it's like Saturn is the like the effects or like the effects of karma, right? So it would make sense that like Libra would be the sign that naturally kind of can like implement that energy, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, there's a firm sense of justice. There's a firm, solid, and strong sense of what is just. I don't think, of course, that was manifested in either Castro or Stalin. I mean,
well, but you could argue that
systems of murder.
Well, but they believed in their system that was what was like appropriate or correct to their belief.
We don't know what they believed. They did what they did. Whether it has to do with the philosophical system or not is irrelevant to me. They did what they did, and they were sponsored by who they were sponsored by. I mean, ideology is just a cover and an excuse for murder, it seems, in our.
Well, I think that's where we get to the point of just because Libra is associated with justice doesn't mean it's always altruistic. Right. Like intent is different than impact, right? The intent might have been, this is what I believe is fair. This is how society should be structured. But the impact of how that gets implemented, can be totally incongruous with that.
And maybe that's the dark side of Libra, is that sense of how Orwell pointed it out, especially in Animal Farm, where if you remember the quote, everyone is equal but the pigs are more equal than, but some are more equal than others. So ridiculous. There's a nice tautology, huh? That was kind of
That's funny, yeah.
what Orwell broke down. I mean, it said everything right there, and it plays into that tautological political attempt, propagandic language, which is what they do. But
What would you say some of the strengths of this moon placement are?
I want to go back to the aesthetic sensibility, because there is this capacity to have this very clear judgment, to translate their sensory perception into a very clear, pristine assessment of what is and what is not. I mean, I've had Libra moons express their position on something, and what I'll do is I'll just pause, and regardless of whether I agree with it or not, usually I don't, but just the heightened perceptual awareness impresses me. And sometimes I have to hold judgment and go, wow, I didn't even think that through that clearly. That's fascinating. And I'll sit with it, and I have an aunt who's a Libra moon, and she's so brilliant. She would just say things, and then I would just pause and go, wow, that's brilliant. I don't fully understand it, but I need to ask you some more questions. I need to get that, because I didn't fully get that perception of it. Does that make sense? How about you?
Totally. Because it's almost maybe like a elevated perception or like a
Yeah,
bird's
it's a
eye
kind of
view.
distant. I mean, it's still warm. If it's skewed, it'll be absent of warmth. But if it's like still, it's air, right? I mean, it's air.
Hmm.
So there's a potentiality for it to be disassociated in distance, like an Aquarius moon or a Gemini moon. Although Gemini is
Hmm.
a little different. But when it's with warmth and care, it's like profound. It's a profound.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think like because of its cardinal modality rather, I do tend to think of Gemini as being maybe the one that's more towards the indecisive or you don't really know where you stand. But I do think Libra does strive for like having their position. It wants to like have like a clear stance. But I think where it struggles is to like include, oh, well, how does it check all the boxes of being fair to every single person and or every single situation? It's just, that's very difficult. That's like a very challenging thing to accomplish. But I feel like their strengths, um, being very having that kind of magneticness, especially in the moon sign, to being able to like have a lot of connections or to, charm or be, or, get to know people or network very easily, coming just kind of like more second nature to them, like being able to relate very easily.
There's also a rarefied sense of beauty about them. If not projected out, there's a sense of aesthetic beauty in themselves, or in their surroundings, or in their, what I mean, how they dress, or what they surround themselves with.
Hmm.
And more often than not, the prime motivator in the life is art and aesthetics. So a lot of them are artists,
Hmm.
and a lot of them great perception of art. Go ahead.
I think William Shakespeare, it was a Libra moon. But I know you have some thoughts on Shakespeare.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard
It's
because
hard to verify those old
yeah, it's hard
birthdays,
to
but
verify such things. And then I don't know why I'm thinking Taurus moon, maybe Taurus
he was
sun.
a Taurus sun.
Got it, got
Hmm.
it, got it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know a lot of Libra moons who are artists, who express themselves best through art, and love that expression. And
Can see all perceptions of something and bring in like all those different elements into the art and see things from different points of view.
yeah, and that's kind of what art is. It's taking things out of context and putting them in different frames and perceptual filters. I mean, that's like it's a layering of reality. It's a layering on top of reality, pulling it, extracting it from reality. And so it's this aestheticized world that they're able to create. And that's, that's a part of the fantasy. That's a part of projective aesthetic perceptions. And it's something that they have great talents for. I mean, the looking at um, the struggle, looking at the dark side of the Libra moon, it would be similar to all the air signs. It would be a kind of emotional constipation, inability to fully process the emotions. Instead being stuck on a judgmental perception of what things are,
Mm.
and not and disassociated from it, and not allowing it to fully feel it through, but in fact to turn that judgment upon themselves. And I've seen that as well,
Hmm.
where there's a lack of ability to like forgive or heal the self because the judgments get turned inward, the knife gets turned within, not just without.
What do you think of like moon being the mother? What do you think of those with a Libra moon's mother may have embodied?
um if the mother didn't give the Libra moon child a sense of, maybe a sense of pride, maybe a sense of appreciation or admiration of their own aesthetics. Um, and, that's not good for the Libra moon child. The Libra moon mother might be a mother who's indifferent and is not really expressing emotion to be processed, but a little more distant and non-nurturing, I would say. More preoccupied with the self, very similar in a sense, but in a different way to an Aries moon mother. Mm. So the mom could also have artistic sensibility as well,
Mm.
being, being
Yeah,
surrounded.
I would think that like the mother having like, the child growing up in a very kind of like artistic environment or that part of being maybe encouraged in them, and also perhaps the child being maybe, I think of that, mediation piece of Libra, like maybe had to mediate between two parents, depending on where Saturn is, too, because Saturn sometimes said to be like the father figure. But yeah, I would wonder, I would ask questions, I guess, about if that child had to play the kind of like peacekeeper at all growing up.
Yeah, that's a good question too.
Maybe even amongst like siblings or just the early family life, because the moon definitely speaks to that early upbringing. And it being in Libra, I would wonder, yeah, like how much they embodied that keeping everyone kind of happy and tending to like the needs of the family and the external.
Yeah, they might have even, I mean, put into the position of being the family dog. Everyone likes to pet the dog, but no one likes to really nurture it or spend a lot of time with it or do what it really needs. Just in a sense of, a Libra moon child wouldn't stand up for themselves, so they might not get enough care than another sibling, or
Mm.
enough attention that another
Yeah,
sibling
like they'd be quicker to just kind of like accept that, like, oh, this child is more the focus,
passive a
and they can be
passivity.
more in the background.
There would be a passivity to them, like, oh, so and so never wants to do this, so let's. But we know that so and so Libra Moon will, and then a lot of gets put
Yeah.
on the child. So there could be a lot of resentment, with
Well, it's definitely something to keep in mind, I think, to avoid things like that happening. Like that's why I think a parent should learn the moon sign of the child, should learn the child's chart, because then it's like there can be an awareness around that and like, some acknowledgement of like that each particular child's like unique needs and maybe predispositions, if you will. And I guess the last thing I just wanted to touch or see what your thoughts were is what about the health with Moon in Libra, like from a more medical astrology perspective?
before I get to that, I just want to bounce off what you just said about I know I'm forgetting now. Okay, so
Children,
yeah, I
parents.
just want to amplify that. Like that's a really important point you brought up. but it's, if anything, what astrology can contribute in terms of understanding in the family is knowing your child's moon sign. That's everything. That's where your child is coming from. That's where
Their
they're,
lineage, if you will, their like
yeah.
role.
You can easily get a sense of your child's needs and even how to discipline them just from getting their moon sign. And as parents know, there's many different types of discipline.
Well,
You
I
don't
would
just
argue you should look at the whole chart and the human sign too. But for if you're gonna look at nothing else, look at the
and I
moon.
would add the asteroids to that, of course, but the moon is just so important. Okay, so yeah, so health wise, we're looking at um, Libra rules the kidneys. So worry, fear, indecision, it's still there, even though, like you and I pointed out, it's more of a cliche than anything.
It's the adrenals too. It's fight or flight. So there can be this kind of like freeze, maybe in the nervous system if they're out of whack. So yeah, like I think of that, the kidneys as like this kind of regulator of our energy, our life force energy. So, I think a Libra could get a Libra moon could be depleted by maybe taking on too much, trying to kind of take care of everything and keep everything, in balance.
Getting into overwhelm, getting into
Hmm.
freeze, getting into disassociative freezes. I mean, I think that's common with all the air moons.
Hmm.
There's an
Yeah.
overtaxed nervous system. I mean, if we're
It
looking at it from the trauma.
it is ruled by Venus too, so there's a potential tendency for maybe like indulgence with like food or substances that always needs to
Oh,
be looked at with Venus or Jupiterian types, the enjoyment of the pleasures, the sensory pleasures. With Libra, though, I do know, well, more so with Scorpio, I think, but with Libra too, I would say maybe being ruled by Venus, venereal, imbalances is something to keep in mind, like sexual health related um, imbalances to watch out for.
yeah, and great point about the attachment to sweets. They usually say the best evidence of a child that didn't get what it needs is instead of being excited by, mom appearing or dad appearing, there was a certain point where they didn't get enough attention. And so what excites them is candy. You know what I mean? What excites them is like highs,
Mm-hmm.
highs that are disassociated from what their nervous system, what they really need, which is connection. We forget that
Yeah.
like kids don't just need, love and a home and food. They also need to be regulated. And babies don't regulate themselves, and neither do little children. Like, they need the parent to regulate them. And if the parent doesn't help teach them how to regulate, then they'll never be able to regulate, hence addictions in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like turning to something to fill that void, if you will.
That
Especially
void.
sweet cravings, because sweet cravings can usually signify like there's an emotion usually attached to the like flavor or types of food you're craving. And so with sweetness, it's like a lack of feeling sweet, literal sweetness.
Oh
Or
yeah.
you could use the
Love,
term affection maybe in
love,
one's life.
feeling sweet. Yeah, well said. You got into the medical astrology there.
Yeah, a little bit. So that about wraps it up for the moon in Libra. We have a whole series where we go over all of the moon signs, and it's a great way to just like familiarize yourself more deeply with your moon sign or those people you know who embody that moon sign. As Mario mentioned, it's like a very deep part of our history, if you will. Like according to shamanic astrology, it's considered like our tribe we come from, if you want to use that kind of terminology, from past lives, the tribe of like, or to use a more modern terminology, maybe it's like the the university we attended of life. So yeah, it's a very deep part of how we relate and interact. But yeah, that's kind of it for today. And if you guys have any topic requests, you can write to us. We both are available for one-to-one readings. Any final thoughts?
No, that's about it.
Okay, cool.